What if a single set of rules could make you dangerously rich and almost no one around you even knows they exist? History is filled with men who worked endlessly yet died with nothing. Not because they lacked effort or intelligence, but because they never understood how money and power really move. The truth is harsh. Wealth doesn't reward the hardest worker. It rewards the man who understands the hidden game. Machiavelli saw this pattern everywhere, a ruthless law of human nature that crowns those who control perception, timing, and leverage while burying those who chase money blindly. The cruel part is this: you've already seen it happen your whole life, watching some rise faster than reason while others struggle without end. Yet the real cause remained invisible. But if you learn to see the game the way the powerful see it, the same rules that keep most men poor can become the weapon that lifts you above them. It is the difference between chasing money and commanding it. And once you understand it, you will never look at wealth the same way again. Machiavelli observed that the first illusion men fall into is the belief that money is something to be chased. He watched merchants, soldiers, and princes exhaust themselves pursuing coins, as if wealth were a creature that could be hunted through sheer effort. Yet he understood something colder and more precise. The richest men in any city were rarely the busiest, and the busiest were rarely the richest. What separated them was not effort, but design. One man spent his life trading hours for survival, while another spent years building mechanisms that produced value, whether he stood present or absent. To the untrained eye, both appeared to be working, yet one was constructing a wheel while the other ran endlessly inside it. He often described this distinction as the difference between motion and leverage. Motion exhausts, leverage compounds. Most people crave the sensation of progress, the comforting illusion that constant activity must lead somewhere. They answer messages instantly, pursue every opportunity, scatter their strength across 100 minor pursuits, and in doing so they dissipate the only resource that truly builds wealth: concentrated force applied over time. Machiavelli saw this pattern in courts and markets alike. Those who rose were rarely the fastest to act. They were the most deliberate. They moved only when the ground beneath them guaranteed advantage. And because of this restraint, every action they took carried disproportionate weight. This required a form of patience so severe that most men could not endure it. Delayed gratification in its common form is merely the willingness to wait days or months. But the patience that creates dangerous wealth stretches across years, sometimes decades, sustained not by hope, but by calculation. Machiavelli observed princes who planted strategies whose fruits they would not taste until their hair had turned gray. They endured ridicule, misunderstanding, and the quiet pressure of watching lesser men appear to advance more quickly. Yet time, indifferent and relentless, always exposed the truth. What grows slowly establishes roots that storms cannot tear free. What grows quickly often collapses under its own weight. He warned that the greatest enemy of such patience is emotion. Emotional reactions, he noted, are luxuries affordable only to those with nothing at stake. A single impulsive decision born from anger, envy, or fear can erase years of careful positioning. Markets, negotiations, alliances, and opportunities all punish the man who reacts rather than calculates. Machiavelli believed that mastery of the self was not a moral virtue, but a strategic necessity. The man who cannot govern his impulses cannot govern outcomes. He becomes predictable, and predictability is the first weakness exploited by rivals who remain cold while he burns. There is in this discipline a deeper principle that few recognize. Wealth does not merely reward intelligence or effort. It rewards concentration. The mind, like a lens, gains power only when it focuses. Scatter the light and it warms nothing. Concentrate it and it ignites steel. Machiavelli saw countless men of talent achieve little because they pursued too many directions at once. Each new project, each new distraction, each new fascination diluted the force that might have built something formidable. The dangerously rich, by contrast, often appear almost obsessive in their narrowness. They choose a single domain, a single machine to build, and they pour years of thought and labor into refining it until it operates with silent efficiency, producing results long after the initial effort has faded from memory. He illustrated this with the image of a general preparing for war. An inexperienced commander rushes toward battle at the first sign of weakness in the enemy, eager to claim a swift victory. A seasoned strategist waits, studies, positions, and allows conditions to mature. To outsiders, this patience looks like hesitation. But when the moment arrives, the seasoned commander moves with such precision that the outcome is decided before the first sword is drawn. So it is with wealth. Long-term positioning quietly defeats short-term opportunity, not through speed but through inevitability. The man who spends years placing himself at the center of a system eventually reaches a point where outcomes begin to bend toward him, not because of luck, but because every path now leads through the structures he has built. And this is the moment Machiavelli regarded as the true threshold of dangerous wealth. The transition from effort to inevitability. When income no longer depends on constant exertion, when influence multiplies without visible motion, when time itself becomes an ally rather than an adversary, the game changes. The man who has reached this point does not need to chase opportunities. Opportunities begin to converge upon him, drawn by the quiet gravity of the systems he has created. Others will call it fortune or timing or genius, never realizing that what they are witnessing is the result of years spent thinking while others reacted, building while others consumed, waiting while others hurried. And once a man understands this law, he no longer measures progress by how fast he moves, but by how precisely he positions himself for the movements that matter. And once a man begins to understand this law, another realization emerges, one that is even more uncomfortable than the first. Most people do not truly want wealth. They want the appearance of wealth, the symbols of it, the fleeting signals that provoke admiration in others. Machiavelli observed that men often pursue status with far greater intensity than they pursue power. And the two are not the same. Status depends on the approval of others. Power depends on structures that function regardless of opinion. The man who seeks status spends his earnings as quickly as he acquires them, converting capital into applause. The man who seeks power converts his earnings into assets, systems, and positions that grow silently while others sleep. This distinction requires a level of calculation that few are willing to embrace. To become dangerously rich is not merely to earn more than others, but to think on a different timeline entirely. While most men measure progress in days and weeks, the strategist measures in cycles and decades. He studies how industries evolve, how markets shift, how human behavior repeats itself across generations. Machiavelli often remarked that men believe events are unpredictable only because they fail to see the patterns that govern them. The patient observer, however, begins to recognize that human nature moves in rhythms. And once those rhythms are understood, positioning becomes far more powerful than reaction. This is why calculated patience so often defeats speed. Urgency feels powerful, but it is frequently the ally of error. Decisions made in haste are rarely decisions made from strength. They are decisions made from pressure. Machiavelli saw rulers destroy alliances, squander fortunes, and provoke unnecessary conflicts simply because they could not tolerate the discomfort of waiting. Yet the discomfort of waiting is insignificant compared to the cost of acting too soon. Time, when used strategically, becomes a weapon. It allows competitors to exhaust themselves to reveal their intentions, to weaken their own positions, while the patient strategist remains still, conserving strength. There is a deeper psychological challenge hidden within this patience, one that separates those who merely understand these ideas from those who truly live by them. Extreme delayed gratification demands the ability to endure invisibility. For long periods, there will be no visible progress, no recognition, no external proof that the strategy is working. Machiavelli understood that this phase destroys most men, not because their plans are flawed, but because their confidence is fragile. They require constant reassurance, constant signs of advancement, constant evidence that they are on the right path. The dangerously calculated man, by contrast, draws certainty from his design rather than from immediate results. He trusts the architecture he has built, even when the outer world offers no applause. Emotion remains the great saboteur in this phase as well. The market rises and falls, opportunities appear and vanish, and voices everywhere demand immediate action. Fear urges retreat, excitement urges reckless expansion. Machiavelli believed that both emotions are equally dangerous, for both distort judgment. The man who panics sells what he should hold. The man who becomes euphoric invests where he should observe. In both cases, the decision is no longer guided by calculation, but by impulse. And impulse is the language of those who are easily manipulated by circumstances. True financial power belongs to those who can remain unmoved while others swing between despair and exhilaration. Concentration of effort becomes essential here, not only in action but in thought. Machiavelli saw that the mind, when disciplined, becomes capable of extraordinary precision. The strategist does not allow his attention to fragment across endless distractions, for he knows that attention is the foundation of all creation. Every enterprise, every fortune, every enduring institution began as a sustained act of focus maintained long enough for complexity to emerge and strength to accumulate. Scatter attention and nothing takes root. Concentrated and even modest beginnings can grow into structures of immense power. And so long-term positioning quietly continues its work, often invisible to those who judge only by appearances. The dangerously rich are not always the most visible figures in the room. They are often the ones observing, calculating, placing themselves where future flows of value will converge. They think not only about what exists today, but about what will exist 5, 10, or 20 years from now. And they shape their actions accordingly. When the future finally arrives, it appears to others as if success has come suddenly, as if fortune has intervened without warning. Yet, what they are witnessing is not sudden at all. It is the inevitable result of years spent preparing in silence, while others competed for noise. And as this long horizon begins to shape a man's thinking, another shift occurs, one that few ever recognize until it is too late. He stops measuring wealth by income and begins measuring it by control. Machiavelli understood that money by itself is only a tool, and tools are valuable only insofar as they extend influence. A purse filled with gold that must be constantly guarded, constantly replenished, and constantly defended is not power but burden. True wealth is that which increases autonomy, that which reduces dependence, that which grants the ability to choose one's movements without asking permission from circumstance or employer or market mood. The dangerously rich are not defined by what they possess, but by what they are no longer forced to do. This is why the construction of machines that produce value becomes the central task. Machiavelli did not use the language of factories or algorithms, yet he described systems of tribute, trade, and taxation that functioned in the same way. A machine is any structure that continues to produce results without requiring constant labor from its creator. It may be a business, a network, an investment, or a position within a system that channels value toward its holder. Most men never build such mechanisms because they cannot endure the long period during which effort is required, but results remain small. They abandon the process too soon, retreating to the safety of wages and predictable routines, never realizing that they have traded long-term power for short-term comfort. The dangerously calculated man understands that the early stage of building such machines is the most difficult precisely because it appears unrewarding. Days of work produce little visible progress. Months of discipline yield modest returns, and the temptation to abandon the strategy grows stronger with each passing week. Machiavelli observed that this is the moment when the majority surrender. They interpret slow beginnings as failure, not recognizing that nearly every enduring structure in history began with a period of quiet, almost invisible growth. Foundations are always laid in silence, and silence is easily mistaken for stagnation by those who lack patience. There is also a subtle psychological trap hidden in the pursuit of wealth, the desire to feel successful before one actually is. Machiavelli saw men spend their first gains on symbols of status, on comforts and luxuries that signaled arrival, while silently undermining future growth. It was not ignorance that drove them, but the hunger for recognition, the need to display progress to others. Yet every coin spent on appearance is a coin that cannot be invested in expansion, and every decision driven by vanity weakens the structure that might have produced true power. The dangerously rich often appear modest in the early stages, not out of humility, but out of calculation. They understand that premature celebration is a form of sabotage. Emotional reactions remain the enemy here as well, though in more subtle forms. Envy becomes particularly dangerous, for it tempts a man to imitate the visible success of others without understanding the hidden foundations beneath it. Machiavelli warned that imitation without comprehension leads to ruin. A merchant who copies the outward strategy of a rival without grasping the conditions that made it effective will find himself exposed when those conditions change. The dangerously calculated man studies causes not appearances. He asks not what another man has done, but why it worked, and whether those same forces exist in his own circumstances. Concentration of effort deepens further at this stage, becoming not merely a discipline but a philosophy of life. The strategist begins to eliminate everything that does not serve the central objective. Distractions lose their appeal. Unnecessary conflicts are avoided, and time itself is guarded with increasing vigilance. Machiavelli believed that time was the most underestimated form of capital, for once spent it cannot be reclaimed. The man who wastes years on scattered pursuits does not merely delay success, he destroys possibilities that will never return. The dangerously rich treat their hours with the same care that misers treat gold, investing them only where growth is most certain. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the effect of this discipline begins to compound. Systems strengthen, positions solidify, and opportunities appear that would have been invisible to the man who rushed from one pursuit to another. What once required intense effort begins to require only supervision. What once demanded constant attention begins to operate with increasing independence. To outsiders, the transformation seems sudden, as if fortune has intervened overnight. Yet Machiavelli understood that what appears sudden is usually the final stage of a process that has been unfolding for years, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when its results could no longer be ignored. And at this stage, another principle begins to reveal itself, one that separates the merely wealthy from the dangerously rich, the understanding that positioning is more powerful than effort. Machiavelli observed that most men attempt to overpower reality through sheer force, believing that more work, more urgency, and more movement must inevitably produce better outcomes. Yet he saw again and again that a man who stands in the right place at the right moment achieves more with a single step than another who runs endlessly in the wrong direction. Wealth, like power, flows along channels, and the strategist's task is not to chase the current but to place himself where the current already moves. This requires a form of perception that few cultivate, the ability to see not only what exists but what is forming beneath the surface. Industries rise and decline, technologies emerge, habits shift, and entire markets reshape themselves long before the majority notices. Machiavelli understood that those who recognize these movements early gain an advantage that no amount of effort can replace. The man who arrives early to a fertile ground may plant slowly and still harvest more than the man who arrives late and works furiously. Timing, when joined with preparation, becomes a force multiplier, allowing small actions to produce enormous consequences. Yet even here the greatest danger remains internal rather than external. The mind, when confronted with opportunity, often becomes impatient, craving immediate results rather than sustained advantage. Machiavelli warned that impatience disguises itself as ambition. A man convinces himself that he is acting boldly when in truth he is merely surrendering to the fear of missing out. This fear drives countless decisions that appear energetic but ultimately weaken long-term positions. The dangerously calculated man, by contrast, is willing to let opportunities pass if they do not align with his deeper strategy. He understands that saying no is often more powerful than saying yes, for every commitment consumes time, energy, and attention that cannot be reclaimed. There is also the matter of attention itself, which Machiavelli regarded as one of the most valuable resources a man possesses. In an age of endless noise, where every voice competes for notice and every distraction promises momentary stimulation, the ability to sustain focus becomes increasingly rare. Yet, it is precisely this rarity that gives it value. The man who can concentrate deeply for long periods gains an advantage that others cannot easily imitate, for most lack the discipline to endure sustained effort without interruption. Attention, once mastered, becomes a tool as potent as capital, allowing a man to solve problems others abandon, to see patterns others overlook, and to build structures others cannot sustain. Machiavelli often compared this discipline to the patience of a predator. The wolf does not chase every movement in the forest. It observes, waits, and chooses the moment when success is most certain. Energy conserved becomes energy available at the decisive instant. In the same way, the dangerously rich do not exhaust themselves in constant motion. They remain still when stillness is advantageous, and they move with intensity only when conditions favor them. To observers, this rhythm appears effortless, even mysterious, but it is in fact the result of rigorous control over impulse and attention. Another truth emerges as this way of living becomes habitual. Long-term positioning not only increases wealth, it reduces risk. The man who depends entirely on immediate income stands constantly exposed to the fluctuations of circumstance. A single disruption, a single misfortune can undo years of labor. But the man who has built multiple streams of value, who has positioned himself across different channels of income and influence, becomes increasingly resilient. Each structure reinforces the others, creating a network of stability that grows stronger with time. Risk does not disappear, but it becomes manageable, contained, and far less threatening. And so, the dangerously calculated life begins to take on a different rhythm altogether. Days are no longer measured by urgency but by progress. Decisions are no longer driven by pressure but by alignment with long-term vision. The noise of the world grows quieter, not because it is diminished, but because the strategist has learned to ignore what does not matter. He understands that wealth in its most potent form is not the result of frantic action, but of precise deliberate movement sustained over long periods. And as this understanding deepens, the difference between the hurried and the calculated becomes impossible to ignore, for one lives in constant reaction, while the other moves with quiet, deliberate control. And with this control comes a transformation that few anticipate. The realization that the greatest advantage in the pursuit of wealth is not intelligence, not connections, and not even capital, but emotional stability. Machiavelli observed that fortunes were often lost not in moments of ignorance, but in moments of agitation. A ruler who panics signs treaties he later regrets. A merchant who becomes greedy extends himself beyond his means. A speculator who becomes fearful abandons positions at the very moment patience would have rewarded him. In each case, it is not the external world that defeats the man, but the storm within him. This inner stability does not arise by accident. It is cultivated deliberately through habits of thought that reduce impulsive reaction and strengthen clarity. The dangerously calculated man trains himself to pause, to observe, to allow the first surge of emotion to pass before he acts. He knows that the first impulse is rarely the wisest, for it is shaped by fear, pride, or desire, rather than by reason. Machiavelli believed that the ability to delay response, even by a few moments, often determines the difference between victory and error. In that brief space between stimulus and action, The strategist reclaims control. Another principle becomes clear as this discipline deepens. Wealth is accumulated not only through what a man does, but through what he refuses to do. Restraint, though rarely celebrated, is one of the most powerful forces in strategy. Every unnecessary purchase avoided, every unwise investment declined, every distraction ignored preserves energy and capital for the moments that truly matter. Machiavelli saw that men often destroy their own progress through excess, not through scarcity. They reach a position of strength and then weaken it by indulgence, by overexpansion, by the desire to enjoy the fruits of success before the tree has fully matured. There is also a subtle form of power in remaining underestimated. The man who appears modest, who speaks little of his plans, who advances quietly rather than loudly, gains a freedom that the boastful never possess. Machiavelli understood that attention is a double-edged sword. To be admired is to be observed, and to be observed is to be studied. Rivals prepare themselves against the threats they can see, but they often overlook the forces that move in silence. The dangerously rich do not need to announce their progress. They allow their results to speak when the time is right, and until then, they move without attracting unnecessary resistance. Patience, restraint, and emotional control combine to produce another advantage: the ability to endure periods of uncertainty without abandoning the path. Markets fluctuate, ventures encounter setbacks, and strategies require adjustment. The impatient interpret these moments as signs of failure, but the strategist recognizes them as inevitable phases of any long endeavor. Machiavelli compared this to the tides of the sea, which recede only to return with greater force. The man who abandons his position at the first sign of retreat forfeits the gains that patience would have delivered. The man who holds steady, adjusting without panicking, often emerges stronger than before. As these principles take root, the nature of effort itself begins to change. Work becomes less frantic, less reactive, and more deliberate. Each action is chosen carefully, aligned with a broader design, and executed with precision. The dangerously calculated man no longer feels the need to prove his productivity through constant activity. He understands that the appearance of busyness is often a disguise for lack of direction. True progress is often quiet, almost invisible, revealed not in daily fluctuations, but in the steady upward movement that becomes undeniable over time. And gradually a final insight emerges, one that few grasp until late in life. The true purpose of wealth is not luxury, but freedom of movement. The ability to choose where to live, what to pursue, whom to associate with, and how to spend one's time is the ultimate form of power in the modern world. Machiavelli believed that a man who controls his time controls his life, and a man who controls his life cannot easily be controlled by others. Dangerous wealth in its purest form is not measured in possessions, but in independence and the quiet certainty that one's path is governed by intention rather than necessity. And when a man reaches this point, when patience has hardened into discipline, and discipline has shaped his habits, he begins to see the world differently from those around him. What once appeared chaotic now reveals patterns. What once felt uncertain now becomes predictable. Machiavelli believed that most men move through life reacting to events as they occur, never realizing that the forces shaping those events have been in motion long before the outcome becomes visible. The dangerously calculated man studies these forces. He looks beneath appearances, asking not what is happening, but what must inevitably follow from what is happening. This way of thinking transforms how opportunities are perceived. The ordinary observer sees a chance and asks whether it will bring immediate gain. The strategist asks whether it strengthens his long-term position. Many opportunities, though attractive in the short term, weaken future leverage by consuming time, capital, or attention that could have been invested more wisely. Machiavelli saw that the power to decline such opportunities is one of the rarest and most valuable abilities a man can develop. It requires clarity of purpose and the confidence to move at a pace that others may misunderstand or even mock. There is also a final lesson in the nature of risk. Most men believe risk lies in bold action. Yet Machiavelli understood that the greatest risks often lie in passive conformity. The man who follows the crowd may feel safe, but he binds his fate to forces he cannot control. When conditions change, as they inevitably do, he is carried along with them, unable to adapt, because he has never learned to think independently. The dangerously rich accept a different kind of risk, the risk of standing apart, of enduring uncertainty in the early stages, of building structures that few understand until their strength becomes undeniable. Over time, this independence of thought produces a form of quiet confidence that cannot be easily shaken. It does not rely on praise or recognition, for it is rooted in the knowledge of one's own preparation. Machiavelli believed that true confidence is not loud. It is calm, deliberate, and patient. The man who has spent years studying, building, and refining his position does not need to prove his worth through words or gestures. His results, when they emerge, carry a weight that no performance can imitate. There is in this calm confidence a kind of silence that unsettles others. People are accustomed to noise, to constant explanation, to visible effort. When they encounter someone who moves deliberately, who speaks little of his plans, and whose progress seems to unfold without visible strain, they often misinterpret what they see. Some assume luck. Others assume secrecy. Few recognize the truth, which is that such a man has mastered the art of sustained, calculated action. He has learned to think beyond the present moment, to align his decisions with the direction of the future rather than the impulses of the present. Machiavelli often reflected that time is the ultimate judge of all strategies. In the short term, illusion can triumph, appearances can deceive, and reckless men can seem victorious. Yet time reveals what noise conceals. Structures built on impatience collapse. Fortunes built on speculation vanish. Positions gained through haste are lost through the same haste. But what is built patiently, what is strengthened quietly, what is guided by clear design rather than impulse tends to endure. The dangerously rich understand this, and they allow time to work on their behalf, compounding their efforts long after the initial labor has been forgotten. And so the final truth emerges, one that completes the circle from where this journey began. Wealth, in its most powerful form, is not a reward granted by circumstance, but a structure created by intention. It is the result of seeing clearly where others are distracted, of waiting while others rush, of concentrating while others scatter, and of remaining calm while others react. The man who lives this way becomes difficult to defeat, not because he is invincible, but because he has aligned himself with forces that operate slowly, steadily, and with relentless consistency. And once a man understands how to think in this manner, once he learns to become dangerously calculated in his actions and patient in his expectations, the game of wealth ceases to be a mystery. It becomes a discipline, a craft, and ultimately a form of quiet power that shapes his life in ways few around him will ever fully comprehend. If you have made it this far, it is because a part of you already knows this truth. Dangerous wealth is not about money alone. It is about independence, leverage, and the ability to move without asking permission. Most people never reach it because they seek comfort, approval, and certainty, while real wealth is built through discipline, patience, and decisions others are too afraid to make. Now, tell me in the comments if you are ready to think differently from the crowd and act with long-term vision instead of short-term emotion. If this message touched you and made sense, write in the comments, "I choose dangerous wealth." Let us see how many here are truly ready to rise beyond the ordinary. And do not forget, keep watching the next video. It is important, much more than you imagine. See you there.